Let's talk about one of the darkest chapters in human history. Imagine, for a second, a world where half the people you know could just vanish. Not from a war, but from an invisible enemy that no one could see or understand or fight. Well, that wasn't a nightmare. It was the stark reality of the 14th century. We're going to dive into the story of the Black Death, a plague that didn't just kill millions, it literally remade the world from the ground up. Just look at this number, 25 to 50 million people, and that's just in Europe. To put that into perspective, that's like the entire population of California or Spain today. Just gone. This wasn't just a statistic. It was a complete societal collapse. In the span of a few short years, nearly 1 out of every 2 people in many places was dead.
So where on earth did this planetary-scale disaster even come from? Well, between the years 1347 and 1351, this dark shadow just fell across the known world. For the people who were living through it, who had no concept of what was happening, this wasn't just a disease. It felt like the apocalypse.
And here it is. This is the killer. Yersinia pestis, a tiny, microscopic bacterium. Now, we live in a world where we know about germs, we have microscopes, but just imagine facing a predator you literally cannot see, smell, or hear. The enemy was invisible, and it was everywhere at once. And that right there is the purest form of terror. So how did it work? Well, the mechanism was brutally, devastatingly simple. It was this little 3-step dance of death. You had infected rats, which were common pretty much everywhere. Fleas would bite those rats, getting infected themselves, and then those fleas would just jump to a human. That's it. A simple biological chain reaction that would bring an entire civilization to its knees. And because the chain was so simple, medieval society was, tragically, the perfect breeding ground. You had crowded towns with basically no sanitation, and you had these busy trade routes crisscrossing the continent. Well, those routes didn't just carry goods. They became highways for the plague. Every single ship, every caravan, every traveler could be an unwitting carrier of death. But all the mechanics and the science of it, they don't really capture the sheer human terror of it all, do they? What did it actually feel like to be there, when the world just fell silent around you? Just take a moment and really think about what that means. What would it take for this to happen? The fear had to be so absolute, the death so certain, that people would just flee. They'd leave their homes, their land, everything they'd ever known, creating these ghost towns that were just monuments to their terror. Yeah, the fear was just all-encompassing. The plague was terrifyingly fast. You could be perfectly healthy in the morning and gone by night. Families weren't just touched by death, they were shattered by it. You'd lose your kids, your spouse, your parents, all in a matter of days. And the once vibrant sounds of city life, they gave way to this unnatural, eerie silence, broken only by funeral bells. It truly seemed unstoppable. So what do you do when you're fighting an enemy you can't even see, let alone understand? Well, you try anything. You try everything. People were absolutely desperate for a cure, for any kind of protection against this invisible tide of death. And this right here perfectly captures the fatal disconnect they were dealing with. On the one hand, you had the popular belief that the plague was spread by miasma, or basically bad, corrupted air, a phantom. And on the other hand, you have the scientific reality, a biological killer they had no way of even knowing existed. They were fighting the wrong enemy, and they were losing, badly. This whole bad air theory led to one of history's most iconic and, frankly, haunting images, the plague doctor. That long, bird-like beak wasn't just for show. It was stuffed with herbs and sweet-smelling flowers, all designed to purify the miasma before the doctor breathed it in. It was this terrifying-looking piece of PPE based entirely on the wrong idea. Now, an event this catastrophic doesn't just end. It leaves deep scars, of course, but it also forces massive change. The world that eventually emerged from the shadow of the plague was fundamentally completely different from the one that went into it. Think about it. Losing up to half your population isn't just a tragedy. It's like hitting a giant reset button on civilization. The entire social pyramid, from kings all the way down to serfs, was built on a foundation of plentiful, cheap labor. And then suddenly that foundation just crumbled away. And this is the great, unbelievable, ironic twist of the Black Death. With so many people gone, workers suddenly became a scarce and valuable resource. For the first time in 1,000 years, the entire power dynamic was flipped on its head. Peasants and laborers could actually demand better wages, better rights, more freedom. The plague, in its utter devastation, had accidentally planted the seeds for the end of feudalism. And out of all this terror and desperation, a totally revolutionary idea was born. The city-state of Venice started forcing ships that were arriving from infected ports to anchor for 40 days, a quarantina in Italian, before anyone was allowed to come ashore. It was the very beginning of quarantine, one of the most critical tools of public health that we still rely on today. You can really see the long shadow of the plague here. After the main wave died down around 1351, the aftershocks just kept coming. In the late 1300s, you see those first quarantines being established out of fear. Through the 1400s, the labor shortages just kept chipping away at the old feudal order. And it really took until the 1600s and beyond for these lessons to slowly, painfully evolve into what we now think of as modern public health. This wasn't a single event. It was the start of a transformation that took centuries. You know, it might all feel like ancient history, but the story of the Black Death is actually this timeless, powerful reminder of just how vulnerable we are to disease and, maybe more importantly, of our ability to learn, to adapt, and to build a new world from the ashes of the old one. So we're left with this big question, aren't we? The echoes of the Black Death are all around us, in our hospitals, in our public health systems, even in our deep-seated fear of pandemics. But when you look at our modern world, how well have we truly learned the lessons that were written in the ashes of the 14th century?